Thank you. Thank you so much, Nia. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I just want to briefly kind of share with you the connection I made with Layla Feghali and Asmaa Al-issa, and how did this connection ended up being a collaboration for this exhibition specifically, and how kind of our practices overlapped in a very intimate way, I would say. So first we met through Intimate Group. Intimate Group is founded by Asmaa Al-issa and Dana Qaddah. And it's to mainly connect Arab-speaking art professionals from all over Canada. I was lucky to join that group, get introduced to Asmaa, and then through one of the sessions that we had Layla as a guest, and Layla kind of opened up a really important topic for me that is very close to me personally, but also is at the core of this exhibition. And we kind of like, in that session, we mainly focused on the disconnection that happens between our bodies, the land, as we migrate, and how that migration and displacement, how can we find our way through this experience together. So it was an amazing connection, and it was right at the beginning of my research for this exhibition as we move away from the sun. And just reading Layla's book, sitting with it for a couple of months while I'm preparing for this exhibition. The book is amazing, Layla, and it did answer a lot of questions that I had about diaspora, about displacement, about kind of many questions that I didn't understand in terms of what's happening to my body after I moved to Canada from Egypt. And I would say it's written in a way that that I can relate to, that I can go back into, my grandmother's stories, or into the food I had back home, the smell, the experience with the neighbors and the community. So all of this I can experience and hear through your voice throughout the whole book. And Asmaa, I also want to say that Asmaa's work in the exhibition is really very much connected to the space and to Allen Gardens and to plants. And it changes whenever the plants are watered, the work changes. So it has a different life. It changes as the plants are like growing and being watered and being changed like by the sun and how the sun moves. So the work becomes like an integral part of the environment that the plants are living in and inside Allen Gardens. I'm just gonna briefly introduce Asmaa, and then I'll leave it to you, Asmaa, to start the session. Asmaa El-Issa, born in Baghdad, Iraq, cultivates an artistic practice that responds to her lived experiences and interactions with the land, materials, and people around her. Her recent works explore regenerating and reviving ancestral lands and cultures, and focus on the power and potential of imagination within these processes. Asmaa's projects are sometimes developed alongside workshops and gatherings as a way of nurturing creativity while building relationships and cross-cultural alliances, which is exactly what happened with us here. Asmaa, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Fatma, and thank you, Nia, for the introductions. I'm so grateful to be here. Just to start off, I'd like to acknowledge that I am currently on unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And and that the exhibition at Allen Gardens is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. So I'd just like to extend our gratitude and that we're continuously learning how to express that gratitude through action and interaction. So thanks y'all for coming through. I'll also just like briefly say that today's format, Layla will start us off with a selected reading from her book, The Land in Our Bones, and it'll be followed by a short conversation between me and Layla, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So again, I really appreciate the invitation to be here and to be in conversation with Layla. I think every time that we've connected, it's just been so easy to chat. And so it feels very natural to do this. I don't want to talk too much, I think, at this point, because Fatma, you set us up really well. So I think I'll just tell you a little bit more about Layla Feghali. She is an ethnobotanist, cultural worker, and author who lives between her ancestral village in Lebanon and California, where she was born and raised. Feghali's work is about restoring relationships to earth-based ancestral wisdom as an avenue towards eco-cultural stewardship, collective healing, and liberation. Feghali hosts a line of plantcestral medicine, community education, mutual aid efforts, and other culturally rooted offerings with an emphasis on land-based lifeways from the Crossroads, which is defined as Southwest Asia and North Africa, and its diasporas. Her recent book, The Land in Our Bones, which we're here to discuss today, documents cultural, herbal, and healing knowledge from Syria to the Sinai, while interrogating colonialism and its lingering wounds on the culture of our displaced world. So thank you so much, Layla, for joining us. I know it's late where you are, but I'll invite you to start us off with a reading from your book.
Thank you so much, Asmaa and Fatma and Nia and Apex Art. I'm very honored to be invited to be a part of your beautiful exhibit. I wish I could see it in person. I am going to read from the Ritual of Belonging chapter. And the section I'm going to read begins with belonging as a practice. Village life itself has taught me there is nothing automatic about home, whether indigenous, traditional, or diasporic, ancestral, displaced, or continuous across time. Belonging is a practice, a cultivated relationship that deepens with presence and repetition, illuminates with the culmination of eras and efforts. Village life is a ritual that sustains and regulates through its continuity. It's a routine of lifeways that anchor even when everything else collapses. So steady and rhythmic, it becomes familiar and familial. Every day, when I come down the stairs towards the rocks where I swim, a precious young boy offers me flowers. I offer them in turn to the sea. I know exactly who I will see once I arrive there, or who I won't based on the time of day. Which folk I will find on which rocks, which will fish on shore and which will submerge, the trails they will choose inside the water, and the way they will dive in. Like clockwork, I know which tetas will be sitting on their balcony, watching me, greeting me, inspecting the company I am with. Every day, my dad's cousin parks his tractor along the coastal highway after a full day's work and climbs to the rock between the te'a and my cousin's house. I have never seen him swim, just catch fish after fish for hours until the sun is close to setting. First, he fishes to the right side of the rocks and then to the left. When I see him driving in his tractor through the village, he smiles and waves at me, his fisher's hat on his head and his kind face ready to welcome me sincerely. Here, he's so deep in his devotion that he rarely notices my greetings from inside the water. My dad says he's been practicing this way since they were children. Imagine, through occupations and multiple wars, through economic crisis, food shortages and pandemic, through deaths and births and all life's valleys, this ammo or uncle and his ritual with the sea have endured. Each night, he eats and feeds his family from this communion. The fish of its water build the nourishment of his very bones. When I leave the sea, I drive along the Mina road to get back home. The people who live in the house with the huge plumeria tree wave at me from their balcony. They don't know who I am except by virtue of my routine past their house. Haule, they tell me, stop in for a visit. Every once in a while, they scold me for never actually doing so. A few doors down, the men from the fish restaurant gather in front of the garage. They nod their head at me in acknowledgement as they carry on. Just down the way, an elder with white hair and big glasses sits with his wife, cane in hand. He stares at me every day, but never smiles back. The road and its inhabitants are as predictable as the companions on shore, as steady with arrival. There are a million cycles of repetition like this in the village ecosystem. As I ripen inside of them, they educate and elucidate layers of understanding I wasn't actively seeking. My body acclimates in its own repetition of return, and I find myself veering towards the patterns of locals with an unexpected regularity. It's an atypical one, really. Each year, a deeper rhythm of unison happens unwittingly. My days used to be each one on a different rock at a different time of day, a constant fluctuation inspired by moods or a wish for solitude. But this land has slowly absorbed me into its chorus over time. I become more like a bird inside a flock whose movements are directed by the seasons of land. Our wings don't touch, but we move in some form of attunement. By 4 p.m., the village is hot, absorbing multiple hours of southern sun. Submerging in the sea relieves me and regulates the temperature of my body for the entirety of the evening to come. Who doesn't swim finds a balcony with a cross breeze to enjoy. We are all looking for reprieve. We cross paths in our search for it, intersecting in the ritual of these elements ultimately. Sun clocks and water turn into routines. Routines turn into recognition. What was solitary becomes cycles in unison. Familiarity is sown by steadiness. My own belonging becomes about this presence repeated. Not who I am or if I agree, not my thoughts, my accent, my way of dress, not even who my father or uncle is. Simply that I come and go over and over again weaves me into some network of witness, some unspoken agreement of mutual guardianship, some recognition that I am becoming a part of this place with them. Home becomes, in the elements of this land, frequented over and over again. It is the place itself that eventually belongs. My body has learned to crave the hue of water on still September days, the shape of rocks whose path I've eventually remembered, the smiling face of children with hands full of flowers, the fragrance of tayun resin in the heat of August, the amnesiac grandmother's exact same question every day, the feeling of the cedar forest that becomes deeper each time I repeat. Even the mosquitoes don't itch as much as they used to. This elemental immersion builds a homeward pattern of recall, a cellular calibration. The ritual in the land itself is what synchronizes me with the people who also live inside of it. There is so much difficulty in the broader realities of our cities and lifetimes. We each live worlds apart. Yet now, when the children are in need, their mother knows she can confide in our joint care. When Ammo isn't on the rocks for a few days in a row, I know to inquire if he is well. Belonging becomes anchored in the grace of these faces who ritual with me more often than an enveloping sense of seamlessness and my own identity or sameness. A care, some dignity is woven beyond this, as dictated by the land and its cycles of togetherness heeded. These rituals of place endow every needed grace somehow. They sustain life, remember souls, fortify strength in the simplicity of their withstanding truths. When place anchors habit, relationships of belonging and culture naturally form over time. When belonging is built around social identities without anchorage in the ecosystem, it leaves a fundamental gap in the formation of home. Our places make us, not just the ones we come from, but the ones we live in every day. This is often the piece that gets lost in diasporic community formation and modern concepts of the self, fostering eternal rootlessness that multiplies with its aches. I'm going to keep reading a little bit into the next section. Tending the life in front of us. Migration is a natural phenomenon. Birds, seeds, whales, butterflies, even desert sands and winds travel from one part of the earth to the opposite in cycles that life necessitates and mutually supports. Humans are part of these land routes and waterways, following them for sustenance and evolution along with the rest of creation. For thousands of years before colonialism, migrational relationships of exchange between human societies have taken place in generally mutual regard. We move, we evolve, we change and grow over time. We connect so that we may continue. What are not natural are nation states, borders, empire, settler occupation, genocide, and chattel slavery. These political systems of exploitation and oppression have drastically changed how modern migration looks today and why it occurs. A primary quality of difference between settler colonial cultures and historic migrations boils down to extraction versus relationship and consent. Where the very foundation of modern migrational relationships has been violated and manipulated to create the nation states we currently live in, we need not normalize nor adopt cultural habits of severance and exploitation in our everyday relationships as diasporic people, even living within these incredible complexities. There is a common ethos within traditional cultures and amongst Kanaan's ancestors that when you visit another person's home or territory, you live in accordance with their laws and that you never come empty-handed. Reciprocity and generosity are embedded values of practice that must be extended in relationship to land and its original stewards in the diasporic context likewise. This is not merely a matter of formality. This ethic contains deeper wisdom towards the integrity of life and its ability to mutually flourish for the longevity of our earth. These values of respect and reciprocity are part of how relationship has been cultivated in sustaining ways across time, and they are something we have learned from the land itself. Just as we knew, loved, and became with the food, plants, and weather of our ancestral lands, we graciously learn about our new homes through time invested and wisdom gleaned via adherence to the protocols developed generationally by those who have known them since the beginning of time. In a context where consent from the original people was not a part of our homemaking, in some cases, not even a part of our own, living with active regard and care for the place we dwell is a minimum pathway towards repair and integrity. Such care cannot happen if we are in denial about the lands we are a part of every day, our existence within the land, and our very own bodies. Wherever we find ourselves in the world, to ignore the elements of place is dissonant, offensive, and damaging to Earth and its people, and a denial of our own fundamental well-being and ancestral connection in the process. It is colonial wounding that puts us in this state of non-relating and grief for where we are. At times, I've even witnessed this show up as resentment of the lands one lives on. Ultimately, it is our responsibility to humbly tend the ecologies we make home in whatever capacity we can. Our mutual and multi-species liberation depends on care steadily given and received, and depends, perhaps most importantly, on the quality of connection repaired in the process of such stewardship. Our souls need this to be well. Our communities need this to be well. Our ancestors need this to be well. We are the earth, and when we nourish it, we nourish ourselves forward and back. This responsibility is, in fact, a gift of primordial healing. I will stop there.
Thank you, Layla. It was like really important, I think, to listen and hear that be read out loud. I appreciate it. And also just to say that these are the sections that you chose were the parts I had like most highlighted in the book. And only this morning we like confirmed that these are the parts you're going to be reading. So I'll take that as confirmation that we're like kind of tuned in. I appreciate that. So I'll just say, firstly, I think I'm really moved by the focus on process and practice in your writing and also in your work. It's one of those things, like it seems to be the only thing that makes sense because the nature of the world and is always about continuous change and growth and transformation and not really arriving at something. And so including arriving at, like a steady sense of home or like a definition of home. And so, in your book, you offer a lot of techniques and practices about how to create meaningful relationships with place and land. And I guess I'm also like really struck and moved and reassured by the way that you acknowledge and remind us that migration is a natural phenomenon, one of those sort of natural processes. And many of us on Turtle Island relate to this very much. And so I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit, or just like, talk about your approach to these kinds of practices and definitions.
Yeah, migration is a natural phenomenon, and it's also a natural phenomenon that's been interrupted because of, the less natural phenomenons that humans have both co-signed and been dragged into by other humans with more power over time. And so I think that our relationship to the rhythms and the relationships and the connections and the intimacies and the respect and the reciprocity and the kind of non-trauma bound sort of ability to move and to migrate from one place to another and to integrate within a respectful way with the new ecologies and communities you're in has just been so deeply manipulated through this time. And there's so much trauma in migration in the modern sense for so many of us. So many of us migrate. I mean, we know people of our region, so many of us migrate because of war, because of exile, because of genocide, because of fill in the blanks, economic, conditions that force people to migrate and leave their homes, because of, neoliberalism and neocolonialism and all, and the list goes on and on and on. And because of those conditions and how they've changed, the way we migrate has also shifted. Where we used to move with whole communities, now we move in fragments. We leave behind, it's like almost like leaving behind limbs of your body, because you're leaving behind mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. And sometimes you can't go back and sometimes you can, but it's really interrupted, I think, the ability for a lot of us to settle into the places where we arrive to in a way that actually does arrive. And then when you add just the way that modern kind of like, global capitalism has pushed us into these routines and rhythms where, what we do is we migrate to work, we migrate to make money, we migrate to be busy doing a lot of things that truly do not require us to be in an immediate, intimate connection with the land that we're on, even though we're still drinking water from its rivers somewhere, even though we get it out of a faucet. I think a lot of the immediacy of what it means to just as a species on this earth, become part of a new ecology has sort of been stripped from us. And we don't really realize how much of an impact that has on us, because we are still, we're still animals, we're still mammals, we're still species that depend on these things, but the connection kind of has been interrupted. And so a lot of my philosophy or my practice kind of comes from that place of just sort of, I don't know, what happens when we do kind of reattune to the immediacy of that intimacy that we in fact depend on and rely on as a species, no matter who we are or where we are. And what happens when we return to that, just to those basics of actual connection to the place that is giving us life right now. And I think there's so many layers of just emotional resistance to that for so many people, because of the trauma with which migration happens now, and because of the trauma with which we know our arrival impacts our communities. I mean, we talk about this, but as people who, who have ended up in North America, we know that we're on the unceded territories of other indigenous peoples and that our being here is part of a legacy of inflicting perpetual violence and erasure. And so there are just so many layers to kind of work through that didn't really used to be there, or it's not there for like butterflies when they, migrate from here to there, or whales when they, I mean, whales have been, animals have been affected by our choices, but there's not inherent trauma or violence in the cycles of movement that most species on this planet have. They just are what they are. It's just how life persists. And for us, it's a bit more complex.
Yeah. I think something like I'm reminded of a conversation actually Fatma and I had once. We were like we were just in the garden and we were walking to the train or something. And there was like an aha moment in our conversation somewhere. And we were talking about how difficult it can be to find ease and joy in this place, having migrated here and like moved here, like you're saying, with trauma and with sort of like really against our natural will. My father says this all the time. He's like I think about him all the time, he would not have left if he didn't have to. And that the decision, even let alone the act of leaving a place that you're so connected to so deeply, is traumatic in itself, and it's such a huge thing. And so I'm wondering about, like, in our conversation, like Fatma and I she was saying this thing about how, you know, how colonial systems actually keep us disconnected from each other and ensure individualism and ensure that we're separated even from learning about indigenous cultures and peoples, and sort of and keep us further apart. And really, it's because we would be much happier and stronger as allies. And so I'm wondering, you know, what your thoughts are around this, about the power of allyship. Yeah, while
Yeah.
we're here.
Yeah, I think that one of the ways, so I think because of the trauma, we do kind of disconnect, and sometimes it even feels like betrayal to connect to where you are. Betrayal to the indigenous people where you are, if you have that consciousness. A lot of people don't, unfortunately. And also betrayal to the home that you left behind when you decide to like fully arrive somewhere and be in that conversation. It's almost like you're accepting the defeat of non-return, or of of having left. And so I think that colonialism, yeah, separates and divides in so many ways, but the truth is that there is no way to be in a respectful, a reciprocal, a life-affirming connection to our own lineages or the places where we live and exist if we're so disconnected from our actually, if we're still in denial of our being there, and we're constantly resisting it, even though it's giving us life every single moment of every day. It becomes an extractive relationship, even if it's not what we intend it to be, because we are receiving the life of the place where we live every day in order to survive in a very basic way. And that's not even getting into the more philosophical or social or economic or political implications of that. But just on a basic level, we are being fed by these places. And so when we do not choose to actually relate to them, to give back to them, to be present enough to even just attune to them and the way that they're alive and the way that those needs, you know, be in a responsive relationship to the needs of place. And place, of course, includes people, you know. We're basically reproducing like extractive colonial dynamics, even if it's not what we intend. We end up just receiving and never really giving back. And we end up doing more damage than good sometimes. And so I think people have a lot of fear about how to do it right, like how to connect to a place in the right way when you're not from that place. And I feel like yeah, not connecting at all just is not, it doesn't really work. I mean, it's basically a delusion, because we're connected one way or the other, and we basically are choosing to care for that connection and care for and give back to that, or we're choosing to ignore it, and so we're taking from it and absorbing from its life without actually ensuring that it can continue in whatever way. And of course, you know, there's also a layer where us being that disconnected from our own, we end up being disconnected from our own life force in the process, from our own sources of power, from our own lineages, from our own bodies, and from the things we have to contribute to this world towards interconnected, liberatory, life-affirming futures, because we know that that, you know, that they're all connected, that we're all connected, just like those winds and the sands that migrate from place to place, or the animals that do, or the plants that do. We're kind of still part of that that exchange. And so we just have basically a choice, like either we are going to participate in it and we're going to give to it whatever we can, or we're going to extract from it. I mean, even if we don't think that's what we're doing.
Yeah, there's something too that starts to come up around the like seeing the sort of parallels, right? I feel like is such a powerful place to start. Parallels of like shared practices or shared approaches. And something that's highlighted in the exhibition that Fatima curated is artwork by Tanya Willard, and where the artist uses cedar from their indigenous or like using indigenous practices, using cedar from the Allen Gardens where the exhibition is, and to make tea, and then sort of like served it to us at the opening to nourish us. And your book, this is basically just like a shout out to cedars because there's a full chapter about this. And I know that it was really important to Fatima's processing and like kind of drawing all these things together, and it's such a big part of your book. And so, yeah, I'm just wondering like a little bit more about that, about, like you mentioned before, it's not the same exact type of cedar, but there's this sort of relationship, and we can start seeing the kinds of parallels in the importance and significance of, a tree and its materials, and how it's, how it can be related to, how it can be utilized and respected through being used in all of these things.
Yeah. The cedar chapter is it's a very important and big chapter of the book. It's definitely the plant in the book who got the most pages dedicated to it. And the reason why is because the cedar forest here in Lebanon, where I am right now, is it's part of our creation. I mean, it's a creation site. It's the garden of the gods, and it's a spiritual place. And I think that my hope for part of what I was sharing in the book, and that came through a lot in that chapter, is that in addition to the practical ways that we depend on plants, and we relate to plants to survive and sustain ourselves as species on this planet, plants and the earth and relating to the places where we are is also part of the way that we and our ancestors and our species have made meaning and purpose and spiritually, as beings, and a part of the ways that we have understood who we are and what our responsibility to each other is, and what our responsibility and connection to the elaborate networks of life, that we're a part of, across species, across elements, across places, even across languages, across everything. But that so much of the wisdom and the meaning making of who we are comes directly from our intimate relationship with the places where we live and where we come from. And that when we are stripped, part of why colonialism has stripped and severed us from those relationships, the immediate relationships with place, the elemental reality of place, is because of the power that exists and the self-determination that exists and the completeness kind of that exists in the possibilities and the relationships of truth that are made between us and the earth, because we're a species that is earth, that is a part of these things. And so, so much of the cedar chapter for me is really about, the cedar chapter is as much about reiterating the importance and the profoundness with which reattuning to the places that we live and we come from gives us power. I mean, real power, not greed kind of power, but imbues purpose and meaning and possibility in life, as it is about the violation that humans have had and the choices that we make that defy life and how they impact us in a deeper sense, and how we repair and mend from them, and the things we can't ever mend once we've violated certain things, and just that process of of kind of like spiritual meaning making and spiritual learning, and digressing and returning and remembering and digressing again, and where our choices lie within all that, and how the impact of those choices ripple.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to touch on. I'm like immediately, you know, when you're talking about the sort of power that relating to land gives us, of course, like immediately I'm thinking about Palestine and that narrative that very purposely, I mean, there's in the most violent and horrible ways sort of separates people from land, but also culturally and sort of like conceptually, separating the sort of like traditions and foods and all of that. And just to mention that, you know, when we hosted you for with Intimat, it was actually on October 8th, 2003. And even though it was very, very early, it still, we could still feel it, and there was a lot of uncertainty, but we definitely started by acknowledging that, you know, it still felt important for us to get together, and meet and still come together. And so, you know, since then you've released your beautiful book, and all the while a genocide is occurring against Palestinians in Palestine. And, you know, we had an Intimat session actually after we met with you, but we discussed about how to continue creating and making in this place, in a place like this, at a time like this. And so I'm wondering about how, you know, this context and this time has impacted you, and but also, you know, sharpened your goals around your practice, because I feel like there's space for us to kind of like really, you know, sharpen our politics, and therefore like sharpen our work and where and how we put it out and how we share it. So yeah, I invite you just, you know, ask about that.
Yeah, thanks for acknowledging that. And you know, I had no idea that my book was going to be released in the middle of a genocide on our people, and on the people about whom the book was written for, because of, you know, and I'm not gonna lie, you know, I'm finding my way through it, but it definitely felt difficult to think of promoting my work in the midst of a time that is so just urgent and tragic, and it felt hard, you know, not to internalize ways that it felt trivial to kind of be and even offensive to be self-promoting in the midst of such dire suffering. And how could I do that in a way that did not feel like disconnection, honestly, and doesn't feel like just like this is there and this is here, because I know that's not, and that's the whole point of the book. At the same time, I feel like from the very beginning, this book was kind of like guided by my ancestors in such an intimate way. And the reason that the work came about is so tied to these lineages and legacies of colonialism and the way that they have been harming us, and my grappling with how we can, you know, just like heal and repair through that. And so it's so connected, and it's also I feel like because it was guided by my ancestors in such a clear way, I there's a part of me that just kept feeling like, okay, there is a reason that this is the timing for this. And when I think about the material in the book, I'm like, okay, if I knew this was the timing, I probably would have written into more explicitly, political decolonization processes, which, are in my book, but that's not really the focus of it per se. And, what would have happened differently. And then I'm like, well, it's pushed me to think about, well, how much of what I've written really does serve a moment like this, And for the first bit, I was like, well, what are herbs that have sustained us for life when all of the land is being covered with white phosphorus, and that any herbs that remain are contaminated? What are these life-sustaining things, these technologies? How do they help in this moment? How do they move us towards freedom, towards liberation, towards decolonization in these practical ways? And at the same time, I feel like, so much of this book feels like it's kind of almost like the book for what happens when we start repairing, It's like the book for what happens when it's time to rebuild a life, what happens when we need to heal, what happens when we're, yeah, I don't know, but this time has impacted me profoundly, like beyond just like the emotional and the completely consuming level. People may or may not know this, but Lebanon and Palestine are, I mean, Lebanon is as immediately connected to Zionist violence as Palestine is. In fact, the South has been at war through this since October 8th, I mean, our land is being demolished too, and our land is one land anyways. I come from a village, my mother's village was occupied by the Zionists until the year 2000. In fact, today is the day of remembrance and celebration of the day, in 2000 when our resistance effectively got rid of Israel, and that their occupation ended mostly in Lebanon, although a part of our land is still occupied by them. And today is the day of really profound celebration for ending that occupation. So it is very immediate, and and I'm very consumed by the deeper impacts of this all has, and how not just what's happening today, but what happens tomorrow. And it's very impossible for me to ignore. And so this time has really, I feel like it's the first time in my adult life where every single track of training or skill that I've learned have been called into use. Like my background as a mental health practitioner, my background as a political organizer, my background as someone who works with medicine and healing and traditional knowledge, my background as a writer, my background as whatever it is. Every single kind of path that I've cultivated through my lifetime is coming together in order to be a purpose to not just like the theoretical, philosophical, political kind of, needs of the moment, but like the really immediate ones. in every level in caring for our lands and our communities and strategizing towards real actual decolonization, towards actual struggles against empire, towards all these things, and so my connections as someone who's lived in this homeland and who's grown up in diaspora, everything is being called into kind of a unity to be of service in whatever way that it can. And in a lot of ways, it's complex to talk about this, but my book probably has done a lot better because Palestine is on the radar right now. And I have a hard time, feeling like I, on a personal level, on a professional level, have possibly benefited from, from this horrible time for our people. And at the same time, having a platform to actually say the things that need to be said and to be unequivocally in service to and speaking about Palestine and our lands. I'm deeply thankful that I have a platform right now and that I have tried my very best to use it for what is really needed. And it's important, it's really important. So I feel like as artists, as writers, as people with any kind of role and expression, like it is our duty at the very least to mobilize both like knowledge and also resources, our resources, to redistribute them towards where they need to be and to be agitators and to be magnifiers for our people, especially if we're artists and writers whose work comes from the lineages of our people. And so, yeah, it's been a clarifying time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there are so many things. I mean, yeah, that bit about responsibility, there's like at this moment, there's this sort of reminder where it's like you do what you can and sort of like find a way that you can contribute in whatever with your skills. And so I think I'm really struck by the way that you talk about like your entire sort of being is being called on right now. And I think it comes back to this it's something that I've like reflected about your practice in the way that you really operate in a collective sort of network building, reciprocal, like giving and taking and giving kind of way. And your understanding of the way that you build relationships with place and people, the way that you create networks for sharing and reciprocity, so including how you collect and use materials, how you make and sell medicines, you create learning spaces and networks. And something I'm really wanting to highlight is especially your involvement in mutual aid and fundraising at this moment in particular, but also like historically also. And so if you would share a little bit about your philosophy and approach around mutual aid. I wonder if we're pausing for a second while the internet connects. Yeah, I think we'll just take like a breath as we wait for Layla's internet to reconnect.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, Asmaa, that actually, like this exhibition also kind of relies on supporting each other, caring for each other, and it was, kind of produced during like a very difficult time. And I think like it's really, kind of important to remind ourselves, as Layla mentioned too, that whatever work we do, we can use, platforms that are given to us to kind of connect, educate ourselves and educate others. And kind of, I would say, also test the kind of the climate for reparation and for mutual understanding, for compassion, empathy. And I think all these processes, like for me as a curator, they are integral in the curatorial process, and without them, the work would seem kind of disconnected, really, or it wouldn't really resonate with people as, as much as it should. And Layla is back. Welcome back.
Sorry, y'all. I meant to mention to folks that might happen, but it seems like a very good timing for us to discuss, because I think you were going to ask me what my philosophy around mutual aid is. And, the reality is that a lot of the things and resources we take for granted as people in the West, assuming most people here have some relationship to the West or live in the West or grew up in the West or anything like that. They're not really resources we take for granted here, like electricity and also, funds. But for me, part of the mutual aid is so important. I mean, on so many levels, on the level of direct ways that we feed into like lifelines for each other, direct ways that we redistribute resources, which I especially feel is part of the power and duty of diasporic people who have left and are in migrational relationships and have come to, have benefited from empire in very direct ways. Like it is our duty to, and even more so people who have generational wealth and whose lineages are part of, empire's legacy of extraction. It is such an immediate way that we kind of embody a liberated world through collectivizing our own resources and determining where that goes, and allowing other people who are within the margins, who don't usually have access, to determine where it goes for themselves, and not to depend on the bureaucracy of aid or anything else like that, but to just really like move things back around. And for me, as a person who, gets to just come back and forth and learn so much from, parts of our lands and our traditional communities that give so much all the time. Like, it's kind of like basic. I mean, it's just part of our culture. It's like someone needs something, you kind of do everything you can to support that need. We all kind of offer what we can to contribute to the collective well-being. And mutual aid it does feel like a reality where we embody the type of economy that we're trying to build that does not exist yet, which is one that is self-reliant, that is self-determined, one that has no strings attached to it, one that is horizontal, one that collectivizes resources from the places where it exists in abundance, and make sure that it touches everyone who needs it, and everyone has something to contribute, and that we know that what we give to is giving back to us through its ability to continue to be alive. And so right now, I think one of the ways that I've really tried to leverage having a platform is using it to support the mutual aid efforts of my Gazan friends who have been doing mutual aid for years and who have their own elaborate networks of knowing where the resources need to go and how to, you know, how to delegate them, how to get them into places where they're not really easy to get to right now. And that we're so lucky to be able to have like an immediate, direct way to keep saying like, it's like, yeah, we're redistributing resources. And we're also just saying, like, I care about you. And here's like a really practical way for me to embody care in a material, practical sense and to kind of like use the power that we have and to invest in care, or like my teta says, which I say a lot in the book, like to tend the life in front of us with whatever resources we have. So mutual aid is just one part of that, but I feel like it's just another expression of like the being in relationship, the giving and receiving, and that mutual aid, you know, has such a, you know, last week I did a mutual aid thing for an elder, a Nubian elder who's building a cultural center. And part of me was like, how can I do this right now? Well, we're doing so much crisis stuff for Gaza and the need is so dire. And we have to kind of invest in building the worlds and not only in crisis, which I think the culture of mutual aid also at its best reminds us, you know, that we have resources, we have what we need, we take care of our own communities, and that we have to invest those resources of all kinds in each other and in building, and not only in crisis. So we show up for both, and by showing up in either moment, we're also helping to build those spaces and those worlds where people have what they need to you know, to make their contribution to the planet that we live on.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's like coming together in my head right now, seeing this thing of how, you know, the way that you write your book, the way that you talk about it has such a like certain sense of temporality, forward and backward, both equal. Looking backward to like, you know, connecting with ancestry and history and but then also very much forward about how to use that and how to apply it and how to build relationships moving forward. And I think one of the first things, I mean, is the moment I got your book and the first thing I said to Fatima about it was like, this is like a companion book that's going to stay around, that is, you can open to any chapter, any book, and kind of like, it's like a reference, but it has all these different stories that can strike at different times. And yeah, I mean, just like, you know, it's all kind of coming together right now, right? Because then the book also operates in this way that it can be kept as, you know, kept on a journey. I've appreciated this so much, and I'd like to open it up actually to see what other people who have joined us have to ask or discuss or sort of bring up with Layla. If you sort of have been reading the book, which if you don't have it, do get it. There's a if there's like a part or a section or something that really you know, touched you, or sort of you're curious about, or you want to kind of discuss a little bit more, or if you just have any questions for Layla, now is the time.
And Asma, I just wanted to say that also people can drop questions in the chat if they prefer writing, and then we can read it
Also.
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me.
Hear you. We can hear
Okay.
you. Hello.
Hi, my name is Deanna. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm sorry, I don't know the natives in the land to cite, but I just want to thank you so much for writing this book. It has been such a blessing to me during this time. I studied theology and I've studied culture, and I really have had it on my heart to study more of the religious rituals and practices of what you call Kan'an. And I had that on my heart before October 7th. And then kind of similar to what you were saying, after October 7th happened, I mean, we know history didn't start there. I wasn't sure how to move into that without feeling like I was taking advantage of the moment. So I've sort of just leaned into supporting efforts that are already on the ground and figuring out how to use my background because I was in faith-based activism for almost 20 years. But anyway, this is not really a question. It's just some validation for you that the work you're doing is so important and has come at such an important time. I don't even know why I'm crying. It's just like such a soul thing. My father is from Jordan, and he's from a part of Jordan that is so close to Palestine. It's just, a matter of 50 miles. And my mother's from Syria. So hopefully we can stay in conversation. I'd love to continue dialogue with you and others on this call and in this community that are interested in excavating our history, especially in diaspora, so that we can not lose so many of those cultural riches that can give color and vitality and life to our everyday practices. So that's what I feel called to. And again, it's more, let's stay in touch. When I went on your website, I was excited about these hubs that you seem to have set up, but I didn't see any opportunities to connect on those. So maybe there is sort of a question of like, how are you convening dialogues and spaces for those of us in diaspora that want to kind of build this new world that we're envisioning? How do we do that?
Thank you so much, Deanna. It means a lot to me to know that this book is touching other diaspora folks from this land. That's like primary objective here. And it means a lot to know that, other folks are in this conversation and that it's some kind of support through this horrific time. And also to inspire more collaborative energy forward, because so much of the book was just me, sharing like the crumbs that I have. And I know that all of us have a lot of crumbs. And so the hub, sometimes we do events and stuff like that. So just stay tuned. If you're on Instagram, that's probably the place where I most, often communicate and share things. And, I'm like, hey, whatever. So folks can enable notifications there, or you can sign up on my mailing list, although I admittedly am less frequent there. The hub also, the Ancestral Hub is like an ongoing kind of existing archive that is explicitly intended for other people to put in their crumbs, to put in their sharing, to put in their family stories, to be part of archiving and conversing about these things. The structure of it has changed a little bit in in the last year or so, which is probably why you didn't see as obviously how you could put into it. There is a place on there where you could actually submit writing or submit tidbits of knowledge. I think it might be on the story recollection page if you take a closer look. But we kind of found that, I don't know, we're still in this spirit of this taking and not giving. Like a lot of people come to the hub and they want to see what they can find there, and most people don't leave anything before they go. And I get it, but we've sort of been interrogating this form. Maybe like the form of a website is just not really the thing right now. So things are in transition. I also have my plantcestral remembrance circles, which may or may not happen again, but that's been probably the primary way where we've kind of been in a more collective, collaborative process around remembering together. So if you tune in on Instagram, there will be something that comes up soon enough. And take a deeper look at the website if you want to just collaborate in more written ways or archival ways or sharing media and stuff like that. Right now, because of what's happening in Palestine and how urgently I feel like our attention needs to be there, most of my energy has honestly been more on like the caring for people on the ground and for like Gaza folks in diaspora and kind of doing the political organizing layers. So some of that kind of more programmatic work is just, and like, plus this book stuff is taking a lot of energy. So some of the programmatic stuff is a little bit slower than it sometimes is, but stay tuned. And there will be, inevitably, there will be chances.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, Pam.
Hi.
Hello.
I also want to contribute gratitude and validation. I haven't gotten that far in reading your book because it's so moving. I can only read a few pages at a time, and my heart actually hurts. But there's so many stories I have, so I'll submit something to your archive. But I did want to mention that I am a tree empath, and it all started with a cedar of Lebanon that I've been in relationship with for 30 years. It's no longer in form. It's been removed from its place, but we're still in conversation. And about a year and a half ago, I did a meditation with this tree, the spirit of this tree, and it brought me here to Al Shuf Cedar Preserve, where I had an experience of being rewoven into the web of life. And later I was invited to present something at an online retreat, and I worked with this tree spirit to offer this process to other people, and it's called the landscape attunement. And what the earth told me was when a person is returned to their ancestral landscape, whether physically or in spirit, a love song of resonance ensues. It's the restoration of reciprocal relationship. And the land needs us as much as we need it. And I was wondering if you could speak to how does the land express this need for us?
Thank you, Pam. You know, you're not the first person who told me that the book has been moving slow because it's quite emotional. And I'm thankful that, you know, whatever it's doing, whatever the spirit of this book is doing is, you know, is that you all are receiving it and having whatever experience it is that you need to have. So thank you for sharing that. And I recognize those cedars behind you immediately. And when you get to the cedar chapter, you're gonna really see how much resonance there was with the message you already received.
Well, I skipped ahead yesterday, and I love the chapter.
Yeah, there's so much resonance in what you've shared. You know, the first thing that comes to my mind is actually, I have this indigenous elder. Her name is Olivia Chumacero, but I've honestly heard versions of this from a lot of elders, including the elder Hakim, who I talk about in the Cedar chapter, that, you know, when we don't relate to the native plants and the plants that exist in a place for long enough, they actually stop being there. And that part of like the spiritual relationship and the ecological integrity of these relationships is like, you know, our being in relationship to the plants is part of what keeps them alive, and also just spiritually signals their purpose. Like we have purposes, the plants have purposes, and they need to be able to express those purposes. And sometimes our relating to them or working with them as medicine or food or whatever it is part of how that purpose gets expressed. And that we have to keep on being in that relationship in order for us both to still be here. And that when we start to neglect that relationship, plants also disappear. And in the cedar chapter, I share about how Hakim says that when the cedars of Lebanon cease to exist, we will cease to exist as a people as well. But I do think that it's a two-way thing, right? Because the reason they would cease to exist is because of the ways that we are not actually paying attention and being in attunement and connection and love and care for the earth that we're a part of. And so it is like a reflective relationship, so to speak, and one that yeah, we're a relational species, and relational dynamics are that we are constantly our meaning is being made through relationship with each other, and those reflective you know, experiences are what reinforce our existence and our life force. And literally it's science, honestly. It's science. Like on earth, it is science. It's spiritual. And if you're not spiritual, you don't need to be spiritual, because even the science of just the materiality of who we are and how we function and how we persist is embedded within this reflective relationship of attention and mutual interdependence that keeps us all alive.
Hi. We're getting close to the end, but we're not at the end yet. But I just wanted to share as well. This isn't really a question. It's just I haven't had a chance to read the book yet. So listening to you talk about how the more we as people are not attuned to the land that we live on, we become misattuned to ourselves, like our spirits and our bodies, I think is like a really important thing to think about. I was just like relating it to my experience as a Black American and the diaspora of Black people outside of Africa. And you mentioned sort of like the really unnaturalness of something like chattel slavery and the way that it completely like sort of decimates your relation to culture and land. And I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it was really powerful. And it's definitely something that I've thought about, but not quite in that sort of phrasing. Just bringing it up as like, I think that this book and like components of this book can relate to a lot of different diasporic communities.
Yeah. Thank you, Nia. Thank you for naming that. I think it's really important to explicitly name that, because in the case of the Black diasporas, like chattel slavery not only disconnected folks from that land, but also exploited certain relationships to land and decimated it in such a like specific kind of way that that we need to really understand. Like it deserves mention, explicit mention. And yeah, and I hope that the book will resonate and will support folks from many diasporas. Yeah, and it makes me think of the cotton section. The cotton Cotton spoke very loudly about that when I wrote about it in this book, because cotton is also a plant that, you know, has a long history of exploitation, of course, by chattel slavery and in the Americas, but also in Egypt. There's a whole story about it in the book. And what's really interesting is that regardless of the exploitive relationships, I felt like there was this way that cotton stories wanted to say that also there was so much reclamation, especially by Black women, in using that plant for reclaiming agency and whatever bits of agency over one's body could be claimed within unfathomable violence and forced labor. And there's this way that I want to trust that like the earth still has this way of bringing us back to ourselves, and that like no matter how much can be decimated in the relationship, there's still, it's just, it is a part of us, like we are the earth, so that like it still can somehow in this weird way lead us back and like offer unexpected redemption or power even when it's been exploited. But I don't know, it's a lot, it's deep stuff. So thank you. Marina is saying, oh, there's a whole thing here that I missed. Thank you so much for your work and sharing. I'd love to hear thoughts about ongoing adaptation and authorship of new ways and being that are still rooted and connected to our ancestral spiritual practices, especially when some of our connections have been through patriarchal systems that are gate-kept by church leaders, for example. How do you navigate or incorporate these ancestral practices in your herbalism practice, for example, while also leaning into your own intuition or response of your specific intersections and identities? I really resonated with your writing. Their stories of saints and the popular practice surrounding them accentuate the animistic mysticisms with an Abrahamic practice as a direct continuation of what and who preceded it. Due to this fact, folkloric rites surrounding them are sometimes shunned by the more dominant and imperialist religious leadership of certain denominations. There's something fundamentally powerful and threatening in their practical and magical centrality to the people. It re-anchors spirituality into sustained forms of self-directed relationship, building through tried and true rituals of ancestral reverence and elemental interventions, rather than institutional affiliations that necessitate formal mediation with the divine. Geez, talking about the Black diaspora, I feel like that is another way this comes in so much. Yeah, I wanted to kind of emphasize the fact that so many of our relationship with the earth like is very tenacious and it makes its way into all kinds of spaces where it's been tried to be forcibly suppressed, and that highlighting kind of the earth-based mysticisms within our traditions is felt really important to me. And you know, the gatekeeping question is interesting. Like, to be honest, I see a lot of, you know, obviously there's a lot to be critiqued about kind of the gatekeeping systems and patriarchy and the powers that be and the ways that they've kind of extracted and privatized aspects of our traditions and our knowledge and stripped us of many of them at the same time because they're threatened by them. And then I also see a lot of ways where diaspora, despite their purest of intentions, kind of reproduces kind of the dilution of our traditions through trying to reclaim things in a context where they simply do not embody the paradigm by which these things actually emerged, and that we don't even realize how much we've internalized or moved from a colonial paradigm. And so when we pick up a practice or some piece of a practice, even if it belongs to our lineages, we sometimes do damage to them, and we sometimes actually end up participating in like the appropriation of our own traditions in certain ways because we're so desperate for the connections and we kind of working with what we got. But the truth is that these traditions exist within specific paradigms and specific roles that we have a lot of us have been displaced from for so long that we don't always know how to embody them in a way that that's in integrity. So I'm a little bit, and don't cancel me for this or cancel me for this if you want, but I'm actually like also not of the belief that everything belongs to everyone. And I think that gatekeeping is actually part of our indigenous practices, even though it's been misappropriated by, empire and patriarchy. But like in our systems, there's care and there's responsibility and there's intention in how knowledge is built and in how it's leveraged and how medicine is done and how people are trained in it. And it's for protective purposes. And that sometimes in diaspora, we kind of want to like just rebel against that because we feel we've been orphaned. And we've been done wrong in so many ways. And we're so thirsty and hungry for, connection. But like, we also have this responsibility as people who've grown up in colonial paradigms to be humble and to take it slow and to assume that we have certain blind spots that take time and thawing and healing to sort of reattune. And so much is about kind of reattuning to our own unique purpose and place within our lineage. And I don't know, like harnessing the power of that, then kind of hanging on to whatever crumbs that we can find, of something that we found left behind from our ancestors. And I feel like there's so much inside of us that like we are these lands, we are these lineages that is just tied to us also returning to ourselves and to the very unique purpose and power that each of us has. And that, a process of reconnection with care will open us towards, and then we become vessels of knowledge too, new knowledge, not just old knowledge, but also new knowledge. I don't know, that was a little tangential, but that's what got evoked from me by your question.
So we're close to the end, but I see that there's still one hand raised. So if you want to
take that.
yeah,
Let's
answer that question and then we can wrap up.
That sounds great.
Perfect.
Hi there, Nofri. Thank you so much. I want to actually just sit with that comment for a minute. That's really profound. There's so much in everything, and I also resonate with the need to read your book slowly and to really absorb as much as possible, and integrate as much as possible, and converse with other people. So I want to thank the folks that put this circle together, and one of the folks that's in attendance now, Vivienne, who first alerted a group of us that are on the Remenkimi Egyptian kind of cultural remembering of our own, in language mainly, but I've been working in relationship with plants for many years, and plants have been kind of the main way that I started. And so your book has been resonating in so many ways. Yeah, diaspora has so many stories of disruption, but also creativity, I think, is what you're saying. In being, yeah, how culture has in a way what many of us who grew up in diaspora. By the way, I'm in Toronto, Mississauga of the Credit, and Haudenosaunee and Wendat, and I need to learn so much more around the people that have traditionally and continue to steward these lands. And I'm finding it challenging as I'm finding myself nomadic more and more. Yeah, the question, I think I'm going to go in a lot of different directions in a very quick sequence because there's a lot percolating. But the chapter on belonging, I usually don't do this when I read a book, but I had to go right to it. Belonging as practice. Because that has been a question really close to my heart, and a daily question. Well, since growing up in a space that that was questioning my belonging, you know, with the usual question of where are you from, but also not having a land that you can take for granted as your own. So the question of belonging really has been a lifelong one. And the idea of it being a practice is so helpful, just like as so many things as a practice. It's not necessarily a place that you reach as much as a practice. So finding belonging in each plant that I touch and being in relationship and knowing, I'm finding just getting more familiar. Every day I can learn the name of a plant that's near me because there's so many different plants, is really such a way to ground myself where I am. So yeah, thank you for that concept. And I think this in a way was kind of a circle of conversation around these that I would love to see if they are going to be revived. I was hoping actually that I thought for the longest time that this was going to be in person at Allen Gardens. So that's another thing that I grapple with, is that dynamic of so much being digital versus the reality that much of what we're talking about needs to be tangential and experienced and touched. So I'm going to definitely go to the exhibit in person, and I encourage everyone to find out the name of a plant that's near you today and touch and smell the plant. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of Toronto folks here. So maybe you all
Yes,
can,
I'm here in Toronto.
you guys can make your own little crew, it sounds like. And Fatma has brought us all together anyways, so graciously, and Apex Art folks. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, please, anyone in Toronto, reach out to me if you want to meet at the exhibition and experience it together. Yeah, we can definitely do that. I have some time, and I have that, you know, in my future agenda. So yeah, please reach out to me through email or social media, and then we can arrange something together in Toronto.
Thank you to the folks, by the way, and the to Stephen and to Vivian and to folks in the comments. Thank you so much for your affirmations and for your engagement, and yeah, just for being so present and yeah, so thoughtful in receiving my work too. It means a lot to me, and I'm very thankful for this chance to kind of have more of a dialogue with folks around these themes that I know so many of us are living in every moment of every day.
I just want to say that Asmaa left for just another commitment. So I just want to wrap up and say thank you so much, Layla. It's been an awakening experience to read your book while curating this exhibition and putting this exhibition together. And it does remind me, you know, of the importance of the work that we all do. And I have to say that since reading your book, I'm kind of more in acceptance and in peace to where I am now, to where I'm living now in Toronto, although there are so many things I don't like about Toronto. But now I understand why I don't like those things. And they are mostly connected to colonial histories and practices and capitalism. But now I understand that my relationship with the land here should be different and should be built on empathy, compassion, awakening, being present in the moment. And thanks to your book that I'm on that path. I'm doing my best.
So much. I mean, no one said we have to like every relationship either. We just have to respect it, right? I mean, you know, like we have relationships are arranged, but it's good to be able to come back home to the life-giving aspects of our day-to-day. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your exhibit. I feel like that's such an honor and such an intimate welcome that you've given me, and I'm very grateful to everyone for receiving me so generously.
Thank you so much, Layla. Same here, and I'm sure everyone shares the same as well. Same feelings. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all of you for being here. And if you get a chance, I sound terrible, sorry, but if you get the chance to go by Allen Gardens and see the exhibition, that'd be fantastic. Like I mentioned earlier, you can check out our website and social media for other programs in conjunction with As You Move Away from the Sun. Thank you so much for being here. Just want to point out a couple questions in the chat before I close the meeting. Yeah, one from Mona. Thank you all. Can't wait to read the book. I also can't wait to read the book. I really want to read the book now. And then another one from Marina. Thank you so much, Layla. I don't feel like I have all the words in this moment as I'm processing so much. But reading your book has hit me in so many ways and gave words to feelings or concepts I didn't have. If the hubs ever start up again, I would love to be in a sharing space with all of you. Which is just great. So thank you, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. And I'm on Instagram. So, you know, if you read the book and you have burning thoughts on your mind, just find me there. I'll have more book talks and more spaces like this coming up, and you're always welcome.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.